I would like to dedicate my talk today to my two beloved children, Elijah and Isabella, who are here with me. You were the most incredible travel companions. I would also like to dedicate this talk to Mayar, Majed, Mohadin, Mohammed, and Abdul Khalik Bernat, who I love like my own, but who, because they live in Palestine, live without safety, freedom, or human rights. I went on my first trip to Palestine and Israel in 2013 in October. While I was there, I became friends with the Bernat family and stayed in touch with them. Last summer, I learned that Majed Bernat had been shot during one of their village's weekly nonviolent demonstrations. He was 15 at the time and had been shot in the leg with live ammunition. As he described, the soldier looked him in the eye, fired intentionally, and shot him. This wasn't a coincidence. His father is the coordinator for his village's resistance, for their weekly nonviolent demonstrations. I think many of us here are familiar with the targeting of young black men in America. Well, it's similar in Palestine. There's targeting of Palestinian teenage boys for arrest and violence. Majed was a victim of that. The bullet severed a nerve in his leg, making it unable for him to feel his foot. It required special nerve repair surgery, and that kind of special medical treatment is not available in the West Bank. They first traveled to Jordan, and on their way back in an ambulance, Majed was given an order to appear for interrogation on the day of his 15th birthday. Then, knowing they couldn't travel to Jordan again, they applied to go to the Children's Hospital in East Jerusalem. Their request was denied. Majed was deemed a security risk to the state of Israel and told that he could not travel for surgery. Instead, Israeli activists came to the West Bank, took Majed, hid him in the back of their car, and drove through the checkpoint, risking arrest themselves to get him to the hospital. Their international friends stayed with him in the hospital, and Israeli activists visited him. His own family could not get permits to travel to see him in the hospital. He also couldn't leave the hospital because if he was discovered, he would be arrested. Upon feeling very helpless by this grief of this family that I'm close to, I did some fundraising for him, and that didn't feel like enough. And then I made a decision to take my own children to visit the Bernat family and to see the occupation with our own eyes, what everyday life is like for Palestinians. This is Iyad Bernat, his father, and Mohadin, his youngest brother. This is Tasahil, Iyad's wife. And I want to talk a bit about what it was like seeing their family. So we arrived at Ben Gurion Airport in Tel Aviv, and we knew right away that we could not get an Israeli taxi driver to take us to the West Bank. That's quite well known. So we had to figure out how to find an Arabic taxi driver. So the four of us finally found an Arab taxi driver, and he took us all the way into the West Bank through the Kalandia checkpoint to the village of Belain. We arrived late at night and immediately were welcomed by huge platters of food. Palestinian hospitality is infamous. It took me about a week and a half to learn how to say in Arabic, "No, thank you, I'm full." And that didn't help. They still said, "Well, just a little bit more, just a little bit more." Tasahil herself was an incredible, incredible cook. We lived with the Bernats for the first week and a half of our time there. We helped take care of Mohadin. We ate meals together. Isabella spent a day going to school with Mayar, and I'm going to show some pictures of Isabella and Mayar because they formed a very close and special friendship while they were there. This is the food. So these are some dishes of Mayar's cooking before I get to Isabella's pictures. In the top we have manakish, and here we have fava beans that are fried. These fava beans were grown in a farm in the village. Unfortunately, they have difficulty paying for enough water because, as I said, Palestinians get 20% of the water that Israeli settlers get. But Belain is a farming village, so these are the fava beans from the farm in the village. The manakish on top was baked in an outdoor oven, and every day with every meal, we had olive oil from the olive trees in their backyards, and olives that had been cured by the family. This is Isabella and Mayar. These are pictures that were taken by Elijah while he was there. He became very interested in photography. It's very hard to find employment in the West Bank. And one of the things that makes that hard is that if you are part of the resistance, if you go to a demonstration, or if any member of your family participates in resistance, this includes extended family, if your cousins participate in resistance, in demonstrations, and if they are arrested, and arrests at demonstrations happen every day, then your whole family is blacklisted. And it becomes difficult to find employment. There are connections between the Palestinian Authority and the Israeli government that allow this to happen. So one of the things that people do in the village of Belain is many people, as their active resistance, become photojournalists. So these small villages that have weekly demonstrations to resist the occupation have tons and tons of young photojournalists. And they taught Elijah photography while we were there. These are the olive trees that are all over the village. This is Isabella, Mayar, and Tasahil. This is Isabella, Mayar, Abdul Khalik, and Mohammed on their way to school on the day that Isabella went to school. I asked Isabella when she came home from school with Mayar, how was it? Was it different? And she said, it was just school. And I want to say that because there's often the accusation that Palestinians teach their children to hate. And Isabella herself, and people are welcome to ask her, is a witness to the fact that Palestinians in school teach life. They teach education, they taught English, and they study for their tests, they live life just as we do. So the downside of living in this beautiful village of Belain, where you eat olive oil for breakfast from the olive trees in the backyard, is that it's under military occupation every day. Commonly, among the Bernat household, we would hear the children say, the Jaish are coming, the Jaish are coming. The Jaish are the army. They would also at night sing a lullaby to Mohadin. No Jaish for Mohadin, no Jaish for Mohadin. It sounds quite funny, but really, it's quite sad. Who wants their child to grow up with the Jaish as a regular part of their everyday lives? At every moment, in the middle of the night, in the middle of the afternoon, they come into the village, they fill the village with tear gas. Tasahil and Iyad would put towels under the doors to try to keep the tear gas from coming in, because Mohadin is a baby, not ready yet to inhale tear gas as everybody in the village does on a regular basis. So what you see in the back of where my son is standing is the apartheid wall. It's actually, and I use the term apartheid wall intentionally, the word apartheid fits under this UN 73rd Convention of different laws for different people. It's also called the separation wall. But it's actually much higher than it looks there. There's a ditch right before there, so it's actually quite high. Behind it are the settlements, And I've said this before, but the first time I traveled to Palestine and Israel, I thought settlements would be these like little dotting of a few houses, maybe a small suburb. They in fact are major, major cities. They have movie theaters and shopping malls and giant swimming pools. This is while we, as guests of Palestine, took what's called Arabic showers, where you heat small amounts of water on the stove and dump it over your head because fuel is too expensive and water is too scarce. So in the meantime, these settlements, these major, major cities have water parks. So this is the settlement behind there, and you can see, again, that's the apartheid wall there. That's where the soldiers come out of, and you see the soldiers on top. So villages throughout the West Bank have weekly nonviolent demonstrations to resist the occupation of their land and the building of the separation or apartheid wall. They begin just like our demonstrations begin here. I think all of us in Ithaca have been to peaceful demonstrations. We march and we chant and we carry signs and flags, and somebody in the audience here is carrying a sign that's the opposition, and you know what? It's legal here to do that, and nobody's tear gassing you. So they begin their demonstrations there exactly the same way, except that they march just a little bit on the road in the village of their own land, trying to march, in this case in Belain, to the wall. And instead there are soldiers that come out every Friday morning to station themselves on the top of the hill. And the protesters, myself and Elijah included, Elijah accompanied me to the protest while Isabella stayed back in the house with Mayar. We get maybe 500 feet or so, and then the tear gas starts flying. And the tear gas flies for about 2 to 3 hours. The best I could tell was that the tear gas flies until they run out of tear gas. I think it's kind of a thing in the Israeli army when you're stationed in a village like Belain. You shoot tear gas every week at the demonstration until you have no more tear gas to shoot. So they begin shooting the tear gas. We never even get up to where they are, never mind to the wall. The protests when I was there the year before were at the wall, and I was surprised to see that we couldn't get anywhere close to the wall. Now the protests are right on top of the village, which means all the tear gas just blows back into the village, and the towels go under the doors to protect the babies. The reason they got moved is that the soldiers decided that they didn't want the settlements to be bothered by the protest. They didn't want them to hear the protest. They didn't want them to hear the noise from the sound bombs. I don't know if anybody here knows what a sound bomb sounds like, but it's very, very loud. Or God forbid, some of the tear gas drifts back into the settlement from the wind. So they've moved it close to the village. So best to, have the tear gas remain in the village. Here's some images of the tear gas. You can see it looks like it's raining down. In one picture we have Santa Claus, who on Christmas Day, people dressed up as Santa Claus in the midst of the tear gas, and then you see the protesters. It becomes an act of trying to get a little bit forward, depending on which direction the winds are going, and then retreating as the gas blows at you. And everybody takes care of each other. At these weekly protests, Israeli activists come in from Israel, and Israeli activists who live in Ramallah, I'm speaking of Jewish Israeli activists here, come in solidarity with the Palestinian people and participate in the protests. So on one occasion, I wanted to try to get closer. I was trying to get up to where the soldiers were. I wanted to try to talk to them. And so Elijah had stayed back. He was with some Jewish Israeli activists who were making sure to help maneuver him away from the tear gas as it would come. And so I started walking a little bit, and they start yelling at me, "You can't come, you're not allowed here. This is a closed military zone." And I raised my hands up into the air to show that I was unarmed and said, "This is not a closed military zone. This is Palestine. And this is the village of Belain. This is village land that we're standing on. And I am a nonviolent protester, I'm an American citizen, and I have every right to be here, and the protesters have every right to be here. No, it's a closed military zone. So I kept walking, hands in the air, to see what would happen. And very quickly, the gun was raised, pointed directly at me. I think in this case it was a tear gas gun. But tear gas canisters have killed people in the village. If it hits you in the head or a direct hit, then it's very dangerous. It's not just tear gas canisters. As I said, Majed Bernat had been shot in the leg with a live bullet. So they also shoot rubber bullets and then sometimes live ammunition. Here we have, let me first say that we have some pictures of some tear gas canisters here. There's two different pieces right there. These are all manufactured right here in the US. If you look at them, they say made in the USA. They're made in Pennsylvania. That's where the tear gas factory is. US tax dollars at work. So we traveled to, I'm going to speak very briefly about traveling to Hebron. Hebron is one of the most contested areas in the West Bank. It has the tombs of the matriarchs and the patriarchs, which are important to all the three religions, Judaism, Islam, and Christianity. And Hebron has been completely taken over by settlers. So whole entire streets have been closed and to Palestinians and made for Jewish only. And this is in the West Bank. This is Palestine. This is not Israeli territory. And there are soldiers everywhere in the old city of Hebron. There is many, I forget the number, it's maybe 30-something, I might be incorrect on the number, checkpoints throughout the old city. The reason I bring this up is to say how terrified my daughter felt there. With all of these soldiers, she clung to me and said, "I'm scared of the soldiers. I don't like being here. This is very scary here." We were very lucky to have, and I don't have a picture, a wonderful guide with us who runs Youth Against Settlements in Hebron and gives tours with the organization Breaking the Silence, which is an Israeli organization of young people who have served in the Israeli Defense Forces and then document what crimes they themselves witnessed being committed and committed themselves, so that after they realize what this occupation is, they work against it. So this is called Breaking the Silence, this organization, and you can look it up online. It's fantastic. Breaking the Silence works with Youth Against the Settlement in Hebron to provide tours of the old city and of the occupation. So we had a wonderful tour guide, Isa Amro, and he was what made my daughter feel safe. My daughter, a Jewish child in the midst of Jewish soldiers, supposedly to protect her as a Jewish tourist. But she felt safe with our Palestinian tour guide who took us through. That said, she was quite happy to leave Hebron. We were trying to talk to some of them and ask some questions. He was from Canada, and so he spoke English, and I said to him, "How can you do this? How can you stand here and be here?" We were with Isa, and Isa had pointed out to me, that house that apartment right there, that was my family's apartment. That's where I grew up. We used to ride our bicycles on the street and draw with chalk on the road, and we can't walk down that street anymore. And there was a menorah up on the hill, this big menorah. It was Hanukkah while we were there, and Isa said, "You see that? That's my family's land," or "That was my family's land. They've taken it now." So I said to the soldier, what do you think of this? You see me, I'm standing here next to my friend. You may know him because Isa is very well known. He's a very major part of the community in Hebron and well known by many of the soldiers. I said, you hear Isa talking, and his family lived in that apartment, and that was his family's land where the menorah now stands. I am Jewish. This isn't right. This isn't, what do you think? How do you do this? And he said to me, "God gave me this land. God gave us this land. God said this land is ours, and that's all I need to know, and that's why we're here." So that's kind of the extreme end of the Israeli society, the settlers or IDF that claim that God gave them the right to take over the land. But there's a much more liberal Israeli society too, and I'm going to speak about that. And this is kind of a challenging topic because this is actually speaking a bit about my family. So I have Israeli family. They went to Israel in 1919 from Poland. My grandmother had come here to the US from Poland, and her cousin went instead to Israel. So I had only met 2 of my Israeli relatives the last time I was there, and they live in Tel Aviv. They are atheist and leftist, moderates. And so my family, I also had family from the US, that was US extended family that was traveling to Israel with their children, cousins of mine and my aunt, to have sort of a traditional tourist experience in Israel with young children. And so they had organized that we have a large family reunion in Tel Aviv, and my children and I would get to meet our Israeli family. So we left the West Bank through the checkpoints, and on a bus, it was Shabbat, so it was quite a difficult travel. There's no regular bus system, so we took a bus to Jerusalem and then a taxi to Tel Aviv, and then we took a taxi to North Tel Aviv to meet my family at this reunion. We walked into this very beautiful high-rise apartment building where the reunion was being held, and my first cousin's daughter, who's about 10 years old, came up to me, and she said, she held out something around her neck, and she said, look what I got. It's a souvenir from the bullet factory. And that's what it was. It was a bullet on a cord around her neck from the factory is actually celebrating an underground munitions factory that was involved in the production of munitions for the establishment of Israel, or by Palestinians called al-Nakba. So when I saw this bullet around her neck, I imagined I turned sheet white because all I could think of was the bullet in Majed's leg. The bullet that keeps him from ever walking right again. He's now able to walk, but he can't run. He no longer has his innocence. He has what's called a drop foot now, where he controls his foot with his knee. And so I looked at the bullet around her neck to take pride in our shared Jewish history of taking over historic Palestine to establish Israel. And I thought of, what does a bullet symbolize in this context? And I want to say that my cousins are good people. They work for environmental sustainability and care very much about human rights. But I think it's a different history that we learn and different experiences that we have. While they traveled to float in the Dead Sea, I went through checkpoints and experienced life as people experience it on the ground in Palestine. So I was also quite unwelcomed by a number of my Israeli relatives when I told them that we were staying in the West Bank with families and in Belaine. It was a difficult reunion. I also learned that many of my family have made their careers in the military and now in politics. And I want to say again, this is the Israeli left, but it's a different experience. When I had the last time I was there asked the older members of the family, I had said to them, they had said, the Arabs want to kill us, they want to kill us, and we can't ever let there be a single state, because if there is, they'll have the majority, and then they'll take over, and they'll drive us out, and they'll kill us. And I said, how do you know? Do you go to the West Bank? No. I said, have you ever been? No, we have never been. And that's a very common scenario, that Israelis, liberal Israelis, aside from maybe their time serving in the army, they never go. We are descendants of a very famous Jewish legal scholar and mystic, Yosef Karo, and he immigrated to historic Palestine in the 14th century and was a large part of the creation of what's called Kabbalah, Jewish mysticism. And so he's buried in the village where he immigrated to. It's in northern Israel, in the Galilee, and it's called Safed. So we wanted to go and see his grave and see the Joseph Karo Synagogue, and so we took a day trip, actually an overnight trip up there. These are some images from there, and Jews have lived there since the 14th century. I woke up early the next morning and took off to go explore the village. And one of the first things I came upon was a commemoration in the middle of the city, the statue of Davidka, commemorating the weapons that were used to liberate the city in 1948. If you read the top, it says that Arabs lived side by side with Jews in the old city of Safed, the Jews constituting 10% of the city's population, and they were in the Jewish quarter, which is that picture you saw before of old Hebrew writing. Well, today, Safed is 100% Jews. 100% Jews. There are no Palestinians in Safed. They were entirely driven out in 1948. I did meet a few Palestinians while we were there. It was very early in the morning, and I was walking around, and I saw some garbage collection, garbage dumpster, and I noticed they looked, I thought maybe they're speaking Arabic, and I went up to them and I said, Sabah al khair, just good morning, kind of quietly, and they said, yes, na'am, yes, and aywa, yes. And I said, you are a Palestinian. Yes. I said, do you live in Safed? No, we live in another town. I said in Arabic, and I had it right this time, I am with Palestine. I am with Palestine. And he looked at me very strangely, and he said, then what are you doing here? And my heart sunk, because it was really an awful thing to say. And the only thing I could say is documenting. I am documenting. I will go home to America, and I will tell people what is going on in this area. So these are some other images from Safed. The bottom two pictures are of the original mosque, back before 1948. And the top one is one of the houses that hasn't, original Palestinian house, that hasn't been taken over by Jews. Many of them are restored very beautifully and occupied by Jews. And this one house that hadn't been taken over has a lot of Hebrew graffiti. There was also quite a lot of garbage. It was a very beautiful, clean village, except for this one remains of a Palestinian home that was left to have garbage thrown in it and graffiti scrawled upon it. So I want to talk about the mosque a bit, because the mosque now is a Jewish art museum. As I said, there are no Palestinians living in Safed. So what to do with the mosque? It's a beautiful, beautiful, historic building. So it's an art museum for Jewish art. And it's Jewish-only art, because in order to have your work shown in the art museum, you have to prove that you have residency in Safed. So this does not include your key to your original home if you are Palestinian and your family is from Safed. This is if you are a Jew, Jewish Israeli, and you live in Safed and you have an art studio there.